The air in the Big Thompson Canyon does not care about your plans or your prayers. It is a thin, hungry sort of air that carries the scent of ancient pine and the metallic tang of cold granite. Down in the belly of the gorge, the river screams over the rocks, a constant white noise that swallows every other sound. People come here to find themselves, but more often than not, the mountains find them first. I have spent too many years looking into the spaces where people used to be, staring at maps until the topographical lines start to look like the thumbprints of something much larger and much older than us. You start to realize that the wilderness is not a park. It is a predatory machine that occasionally forgets to hide its teeth. On the 2nd of October 1999, the sun was a pale, indifferent disk hanging over the Comanche Peak Wilderness. It was a Saturday, the kind of day that feels brittle, like you could snap the horizon if you leaned against it too hard. Jaryd Atadero was a man trying to piece a life back together after a divorce, taking his 2 children into the woods for a weekend of forced normalcy. They were part of a group of 11 adults, a Christian singles hiking club, seeking fellowship in the shadow of the peaks. Among them was Jaryd, a 3-year-old boy with a bowl cut and a smile that had not yet learned how to be afraid of the dark. He was wearing a blue pullover and a pair of sneakers that would later become the only evidence that he ever existed at all. The group set out on the Big Thompson Trail, moving with the sluggish confidence of people who believe they are safe because they are together. Jaryd was full of that frantic 3-year-old energy, darting ahead of the adults like a bird caught in a draft. He was only feet away from the lead hikers, then he was around a bend, then he was gone. It happened in the space of a single breath, the kind of silence that falls when a radio is suddenly unplugged. One moment there were 11 adults and 2 children, and the next there was a hole in the world where a little boy used to be. There was no scream, no sound of a struggle, and no frantic snapping of branches. There was only the wind and the roar of the river. When the group realized Jaryd was no longer in sight, the panic did not set in immediately. It arrived in waves, starting as a mild annoyance and escalating into a cold, bone-deep terror as the minutes ticked past. They called his name, their voices bouncing off the canyon walls and returning to them hollow and mocking. 2 fishermen further up the trail reported seeing the boy briefly. They said he had asked them if there were bears in the area. They told him no, and he went on his way, walking up the trail with the casual indifference of a child who thinks he is on an adventure. That was the last time any human eye would see Jaryd Atadero alive. By the time the sun dipped behind the jagged spine of the Rockies, the canyon had closed its mouth. The search that followed was one of the largest in Colorado history, a massive mobilization of manpower and technology against an enemy that did not leave tracks. They brought in the dogs, the high-tech bloodhounds that are supposed to be able to find a scent in a hurricane. But when the dogs reached the spot where Jaryd was last seen, they did something that haunts the searchers to this day. They did not pick up a trail. They did not bay or pull at their leashes. They sat down. They looked at their handlers with eyes full of a strange, dull confusion. It was as if the boy had simply ceased to be a physical object, leaving no skin cells, no breath, and no trace of his passing on the earth. For days, the mountain was crawled over by hundreds of volunteers, mountain rescue teams, and helicopters equipped with thermal imaging. They found nothing. No scrap of blue fabric, no small footprint in the mud, not even a broken twig. The thermal cameras looked down into the dark timber and saw only the heat of deer and the cold pulse of the earth. The weather turned, as it always does, in the high country, bringing a biting wind and a dusting of snow that acted like a white shroud. Jaryd Atadero stood at the trailhead, a man being hollowed out from the inside, watching the mountains swallow the search efforts whole. He knew with the terrible clarity of a father that his son was not just lost. He had been taken into the silence. Years passed like a slow bleed. 3 years, 8 months, and 2 days of silence. The case of Jaryd Atadero became one of those ghost stories that people tell to keep their children close to the campfire. It sat in the cold case files, a collection of unanswered questions and failed theories. Some blamed a mountain lion, others whispered about a kidnapping, but none of it fit the physics of the disappearance. A mountain lion leaves a mess. A kidnapper leaves a trail. This was something else, something that felt like a glitch in the fabric of the reality we think we understand. Then in June of 2003, 2 hikers decided to go off-trail, climbing a steep, treacherous ridge 550 feet above the valley floor. They were looking for a shortcut, scrambling up a slope that no 3-year-old could ever hope to navigate. The terrain was a nightmare of loose scree and vertical rock faces. And there, on a ledge that seemed accessible only to the birds, they found it. A single shoe. Then a pullover. Then a pair of pants. The clothing was not scattered by a predator. It was sitting there, weathered by the sun and the snow, but largely intact. When the investigators arrived, they found a fragment of a skull and a single tooth. The rest of the boy was gone. The mountains had kept the pieces they wanted, and left the rest as a taunt to those who dared to look. But it was the condition of the clothes that turned the blood of the investigators to ice. The pants were found inside out. Think about that for a second. Try to imagine a 3-year-old boy, terrified and alone in the middle of a freezing night, deciding to take his pants off, turn them inside out, and then leave them on a high mountain ledge. Or imagine a mountain lion, a creature of instinct and hunger, carefully undressing its prey without tearing the fabric to ribbons. The sneakers were in remarkably good condition, not scuffed or worn down as they should have been if a child had spent hours wandering through the brutal Colorado bush. It was as if they had been placed there long after the life had left the body they were meant to protect. The official report eventually leaned toward a mountain lion attack, a convenient explanation that satisfies the paperwork but fails the logic of the scene. A mountain lion drags its prey to a cache. It does not strip them of their clothes and leave them on an exposed ledge 500 feet above the trail. There is a specific kind of arrogance in the way the remains were found, a feeling that something had played with the boy and then discarded him in a place where he should not have been able to go. I have seen this pattern before. The impossible terrain, the missing scent, the clothing found in a state that defies the laws of animal behavior. It is a signature written in the dirt and the bone of something that operates just outside the corner of our vision. We like to think we are the apex predators, that our GPS units and our flashlights make us masters of the dark. But the case of Jaryd Atadero suggests otherwise. It suggests that there are pockets of this world where the rules are different, where a child can be snatched from the middle of a group of 11 adults and transported to a vertical cliffside without a sound. There is a heavy oppressive feeling in those woods, a sense that the trees are not just trees but witnesses. When you look at the photos of that ridge, you realize that no toddler climbed that. He was moved. And the force that moved him did not use a ladder or a trail. The tragedy of the Atadero family is a wound that never truly closed. Alan got his answers, but they were the kind of answers that only lead to more nightmares. He was left with a fragment of bone and a pair of inside-out pants, a puzzle that no amount of grieving can solve. We are left to wonder about the fishermen who saw him, the dogs that refused to track him, and the mountain that refused to give him back until it was finished with him. Every time I walk into the high country now, I find myself looking at the ledges, wondering what else is sitting up there, bleached white by the sun, waiting to be found by someone who took a wrong turn. This is not an isolated incident. The mountains of the West are littered with these holes in the map. The pattern is too consistent to be a coincidence. It is a predatory geometry that repeats itself across decades and state lines. We are being watched by something that understands our vulnerabilities better than we do. Something that knows exactly how long it takes for a group to lose focus and how far a child can run before they disappear into the static. The silence of the Big Thompson Canyon is not empty. It is full of the things we refuse to believe in because believing in them would mean we are never truly safe. Consider the disappearance of Bobby Bizup in 1958. He was 10 years old, staying at a camp in the Rocky Mountain National Park, not far from where Jaryd would vanish decades later. Bobby went to the edge of a creek to fish just a short distance from his counselors and vanished into thin air. A massive search turned up nothing for a year. Then his remains were found on top of a rugged, steep ridge miles away and hundreds of feet above where he was last seen. Like Jaryd, his clothing was found in a way that suggested an impossible journey, a movement across terrain that a young boy could not have survived, let alone navigated in the dark. The mountains do not just take people, they move them. And they never tell us why. The air in the high country of the Big Thompson Canyon has a way of thinning out more than just the oxygen. It thins the veneer of our supposed modern safety until you can see the jagged prehistoric teeth of the world underneath. We walk through these woods with our $1,000 boots and our satellite phones, convinced that the wild is just a backdrop for our weekend adventures. But there is a cold mechanical indifference to the granite peaks that does not care about your survival gear. When Jaryd Atadero vanished in October of 1999, the mountain did not just take a child. It swallowed the very logic of the physical world. 11 adults were present, a group large enough to deter any mountain lion and loud enough to warn any bear, yet the boy simply ceased to exist in the space of a single breath. There was no scream, no sound of snapping twigs, and no frantic struggle in the dirt. It was as if the atmosphere itself had opened a mouth and closed it before anyone could even blink. The ridge where Jaryd's remains were eventually found is a place that defies the basic mechanics of human movement. We are talking about a vertical ascent of 550 feet from the trail, a climb that requires technical skill and a level of stamina no 3-year-old child possesses. When you stand at the base of that incline and look up at the jagged ledges, the impossibility of the situation settles into your marrow like a frost. There is no world in which a toddler, wearing a light jacket and sneakers, decides to scale a sheer cliff face in the middle of a vanishing act. To suggest he wandered up there is not just a leap of faith, it is a surrender to insanity. The mountain did not provide a path for him to climb. It acted as a conveyor, moving a living soul from the safety of a group to a high, lonely altar of stone, where no one would think to look for years. When the searchers finally found his clothing and a fragment of his skull in 2003, the details were more haunting than the disappearance itself. His tiny pants were found turned completely inside out, a detail that sticks in the throat of every investigator who has ever looked at this file. Think about the physical act of removing a child's pants and turning them inside out while they are still in the middle of a rugged wilderness. It suggests a deliberate, meticulous process that has nothing to do with the messy, chaotic violence of a predatory animal. A mountain lion does not undress its prey with surgical precision, and it certainly does not leave the clothes in a neat pile on a ledge hundreds of feet above the kill site. The fabric of those pants was not shredded by claws or teeth. It was simply removed as if the person or thing doing it had all the time in the world. The silence that followed the disappearance was not a natural silence. In those first few hours when the panic was fresh and the search dogs were brought in, the woods became a dead zone for sound and scent. The handlers reported that the dogs, highly trained animals that would normally track a scent with aggressive focus, simply refused to work. They would sit down, whine, and look into the trees with a kind of primal dread that should have been a warning to everyone present. It was as if the air had been scrubbed clean of any trace of Jaryd, or perhaps something was suppressing the very molecules of his existence. We like to think of the forest as a noisy, vibrant place, but in the moments when these disappearances happen, witnesses often describe a sudden, oppressive stillness. It is the sound of the world holding its breath, while something ancient and hungry steps through the static. This is the predatory geometry I keep coming back to. It is a pattern of movement and placement that suggests a mind behind the mountain, a force that understands exactly how to exploit our blind spots. The location of the remains on high, inaccessible ground is a recurring theme that points towards something other than a wandering child. It is a signature, a way of placing the victim in a location that mocks the efforts of the search parties below. When you look at the map of the Big Thompson Canyon, you begin to see the holes where the logic falls through. These are not just random spots on a trail. They are junctions where the reality we understand intersects with something we have no name for. The trees are not just growing there. They are standing guard over secrets that would break a man if he looked too closely at the bark. Consider the case of Bobby Bizup in 1958, a story that mirrors Jaryd's with a precision that is nothing short of terrifying. Bobby was 10 years old, a young boy with a hearing impairment, who was attending a camp at the St. Malo retreat near Rocky Mountain National Park. On a summer afternoon, he walked a short distance from his counselors to a small creek to fish a distance of perhaps 20 or 30 yards. In the time it took for a counselor to turn their head and look back, Bobby was gone. The search that followed was one of the largest in the history of the park, involving hundreds of volunteers and military personnel. They combed every inch of that creek, every bush, and every cave within a 5-mile radius. For a year the mountain held on to him, keeping its secret hidden behind the screen of the pines and the shadows of the peaks. When Bobby's remains were finally discovered, they were found on the top of a rugged, wind-swept ridge over 2,000 feet above the camp. To reach that spot, a 10-year-old boy would have had to navigate through dense, trackless forest and scale a mountainside that would challenge an experienced hiker. He was found without his shoes, his clothing scattered in a way that suggested he had been moved there by something with incredible strength and a complete disregard for the laws of physics. Just like Jaryd, the placement of the body was a physical impossibility. A boy who could barely hear would not have wandered miles away and climbed a mountain in the dark of his own volition. He was taken, and he was placed on that ridge like a trophy or a discarded remnant of a meal that required no teeth. The terrain in these cases is always described as rugged, but that word does not do justice to the sheer brutality of the landscape. We are talking about slopes of loose scree and granite walls that hold the heat of the sun during the day and turn into ice at night. When you imagine a child being transported across this ground, you have to ask yourself how they remained silent. Why was there no trail of broken branches or disturbed soil? The answer lies in the possibility that they never touched the ground at all. There is a theory, one that search and rescue veterans only whisper about over drinks, that something in these parks has the ability to pluck a person from the surface of the earth. It is a vertical abduction, a lifting of the weight into the canopy where the eyes of the searchers never think to look. The smell of the high country after a storm is usually fresh, but there are accounts from those who have found these sites that describe something different. They talk about a scent of ozone like the air after a lightning strike, or a heavy metallic odor that clings to the back of the throat. It is the smell of something artificial, in a place that should be purely organic. This suggests that the predator we are looking for might not be made of flesh and bone at all. We could be dealing with a phenomenon that is as much a part of the landscape as the wind or the rain, a glitch in the geography that opens up when the conditions are just right. If the mountain is a machine, then these children are the fuel that keeps it running, or perhaps they are just the bits of grit that get caught in the gears. I often think about Jaryd Atadero standing on that ridge years later holding the fragment of his son's skull. The answers he received were not a comfort. They were a sentence of life, long horror. He had to look at the ground and realize that his child had been there the whole time, just out of reach while the world moved on below. There is a specific kind of cruelty in the way the mountain gives back what it takes. It waits until the hope has turned to ash, and then it reveals the truth in the most gruesome, inexplicable way possible. It ensures that the questions will never be answered, leaving the families to wonder if their loved ones were conscious during the transport, if they saw the world from a height they were never meant to reach. The statistics for Rocky Mountain National Park are a ledger of the missing that the government would rather you not read. Since the park was established, dozens of people have vanished without a trace, many of them in the same high-altitude zones where Jaryd and Bobby were found. There is a density to these disappearances that suggests a hunting ground. If you look at the points on a map, they cluster around specific geological features. Granite basins, boulder fields, and high ridges. It is a predatory architecture, a design that funnels the unwary into a space where they can be harvested. We call it a park, but to something else, it is a larder. The boundaries of the park are not there to protect the wilderness from us. They are there to mark the edge of the world where the rules still apply. The phenomenon of the inside-out clothing is perhaps the most disturbing element of the pattern. In many of these high-altitude cases, the victims are found with their garments removed and inverted. In the cold, rational world of forensic science, this is sometimes attributed to paradoxical undressing, a symptom of severe hypothermia where the victim feels hot and strips off their clothes. But paradoxical undressing does not turn your pants inside out and stack them neatly. It does not place your shoes miles away from your socks. The inversion of the clothing suggests a lack of understanding of human biology on the part of the taker. It is as if something tried to put the person back together or take them apart without knowing how the fasteners worked. It is a mechanical error, a sign of an intelligence that is profoundly alien to our own. There is a feeling you get when you stay too long in the big Thompson Canyon, a sensation of being watched by the very rocks themselves. The grey faces of the granite seem to have a memory, an awareness of every footfall that crosses their surface. When the wind picks up and whistles through the narrow gaps in the stone, it sounds like 1,000 voices trying to scream at once, all of them muffled by the weight of the earth. You realize that you are not the master of this environment. You are a guest who has overstayed their welcome, and the host is starting to lose its patience. The darkness that pools in the shadows of the pines is not just an absence of light. It is a physical presence that waits for you to trip, to lag behind the group, or to look away for just 1 second. I remember a searcher telling me about the silence in the high basins, a silence so thick you can hear your own heartbeat thudding in your ears like a drum. He said that in those moments you feel like you are the only living thing for 100 miles, even if your partner is standing 20 feet away. It is a sensory isolation that precedes the disappearance. It is as if the victim is pulled into a pocket of space where sound doesn't travel, a bubble of static that cuts them off from the rest of humanity. Once you are inside that bubble, you can scream until your lungs bleed and no one will hear you. You are already gone, even if you are still standing on the trail. The mountain has already claimed you, and the rest is just a matter of logistics. We are forced to confront the reality that there are things in this world that we cannot explain with our current understanding of science. The case of Jaryd Atadero and Bobby Bizup are not just tragedies. They are evidence of a predatory force that operates on a level we are not equipped to handle. We are like ants crawling across a circuit board, unaware of the currents moving beneath us until we get zapped. The mountains are old, far older than the myths we have created to make them feel safe. They have seen civilizations rise and fall, and they have been taking our children since the first fire was lit in a cave. They do not want our respect or our stewardship. They want our silence. The pattern of the moved remains the impossible terrain, and the inverted clothing is a riddle that has no happy ending. It leaves us looking at the horizon with a sense of dread, wondering who will be the next one to vanish into the static. Every year, millions of people flock to the national parks, seeking a connection with nature, unaware that the nature they are seeking is a predator of unimaginable patience. We are being watched by something that knows our vulnerabilities, something that understands the geometry of the woods better than any mapmaker ever could. The silence of the canyon is a warning, a cold reminder that once you step off the path, you are no longer at the top of the food chain. As we look back at the jagged ridges of the Rockies, we have to ask ourselves what else is waiting up there. The story of Jaryd Atadero ended with a fragment of bone and a pair of inside-out pants, but the mystery remains as vast and cold as the mountain itself. We are left to wonder about the forces that can move a child through the air and deposit them on a cliffside without a trace. This is not an isolated incident. It is a recurring nightmare that haunts the high country. A predator that leaves no tracks and takes no prisoners. The mountain does not just take people. It erases them, leaving only the questions that will never be answered. The terror of the unknown is a weight that we all carry when we step into the wild, but for some, that weight becomes a reality that swallows them whole. Consider the disappearance of Alfred Beilhartz in 1938, just miles from where the other boys would later vanish. Alfred was 4 years old, hiking with his family, when he simply fell behind for a moment and was gone. Despite a massive search, he was never found, though hikers later reported seeing a small boy standing on a high dangerous ledge known as the Devil's Playpen, a place no child could reach. Like the others, he was seen in a location that mocked the searchers, a vertical impossibility that suggests he was moved by something that does not walk on the ground. The mountains keep their secrets, and they keep their trophies high above the world of men, where the air is thin and the silence is absolute.